In this video, I'm going to tell you two intertwined stories. One is about my decades-long battle with anxiety, and the other is about my personal relationship with Jordan Peterson. You've heard of Jordan Peterson, right? For 12 weeks in 2015, he was my therapist, and one piece of advice he gave me ended up completely resolving my anxiety problem. I know experts don't like to talk about people being cured of psychological conditions, but all I can say is that's exactly what happened to me. Weirdly, the thing Jordan Peterson showed me was that the cause of my anxiety wasn't psychological at all. If you've never considered that possibility, you could spend years looking in the wrong direction, while the real answer sits right in front of you. I know that sounds extreme, but I had what felt like a completely irrational anxiety disorder for almost 2 decades. Even after seeing 5 different therapists, none of them were able to help me get out from under it. If you watch this video until the end today, you'll see why the solution to my anxiety problem had almost nothing to do with psychology and almost everything to do with something much more basic. This video is for anyone who feels trapped by anxiety and assumes that the only explanation must be emotional weakness, bad thinking, or even a broken brain. Okay, let me get on with my story. First of all, I assume you know who Jordan Peterson is, but if not, I'll give you a brief introduction. To say that Jordan Peterson is a polarizing figure is an understatement. He's the author of the best-selling 12 Rules for Life, and he has been called both a passionate free speech advocate and a dangerous alt-right agitator. Few people know, however, that in addition to his teaching and research duties as a professor at the University of Toronto, he was also a practicing clinical psychologist. Back in 2015, I was one of his patients. I should probably start by describing the path that led me to him. As a teenager, I was unfailingly positive. I believed you could choose to be happy regardless of what was going on in your life. This was not an original idea on my part. That belief was very much in the air in the 1970s. For 2 decades, it was an approach that worked extremely well for me. I was able to construe as good news whatever bad news came my way. I guess you would say I was spin doctoring my own experience. And apparently, the jury of my mood found the lawyer of my optimism thoroughly convincing. That is, until early one morning when I was 37 years old. As I was getting ready to go out for a run, my assistant called to warn me of an imminent payroll shortfall. Now, as an entrepreneur, I got calls like that regularly. No big deal. I calmly assured her that I would handle it when I got to the office and went back to getting ready. Within moments, however, I was falling apart. People who have experienced extreme anxiety know how difficult it is to describe, but I'm going to try. Physically, I was trembling from a place deep within my core, the waves radiating outward to my extremities. I was finding it hard to breathe, like I couldn't remember how to breathe, like how does anybody breathe? It's alarming to suddenly realize that you can't move your diaphragm the way you move your hands or your feet. My mind was spinning, unanchored, like I wasn't in charge of my own consciousness. I felt completely out of control. I was having a panic attack, although back in 1998, it took a while for me to put a name to it. In the months that followed, I lurched from one episode to another, sometimes experiencing 2 or 3 panic attacks in a single day. But while the individual attacks would eventually end, the fear of the next one was never ending. I tried various medications and talking therapies, none of which provided much relief. But after 6 months of barely relenting torture, I began to slowly climb back to normalcy. It wasn't until 2 years after the original episode that I returned to my healthy, unshakable self. 8 years passed, during which I felt I had completely conquered my anxiety problem, like it was securely in the rearview mirror. I developed strategies, little routines for short-circuiting even the hint of panic before it reached traumatic proportions. I felt securely back in control until one night in 2008 when I was driving with a friend to our weekly hockey game. Out of nowhere, I was overwhelmed with a tsunami of anxiety, once again for no obvious reason. In the weeks that followed, my carefully cultivated strategies proved useless. On one of the worst nights, I stayed over in a hotel when I couldn't bear the drive home after work, my business partner sleeping on the floor beside me. And just like the previous crisis, it took 2 years for me to return to a healthy, strong footing. As if I was trapped on a nightmare carnival ride I couldn't get off until it had run its course. This time, however, I didn't feel like a conqueror. The anxiety never completely disappeared, like an ominous soundtrack playing in the background of my life. It occasionally popped up in varying guises, often as either hypochondria or claustrophobia. I remember one time at a hotel in Greece, I accidentally locked myself in the bathroom and I nearly lost my mind. And it was a large bathroom. And it was in a hotel where there was a guy who's paid to get people out of difficult situations. On the outside, though, I'd say I appeared to have it all figured out. By the spring of 2015, my marriage was improbably satisfying. My relationships with my 3 children were strong. Even the business where every payroll was an existential crisis a couple of decades before was now successful and relatively stress-free. I was in my mid-50s, and objectively, I believed that my best years were ahead of me. So it made no sense that I had all the ingredients for happiness, more than anyone had the right to ask for, yet I spent so much time either in a state of terrifying anxiety or maneuvering to avoid it. I decided to seek out a psychologist, even though the profession hadn't really done much for me so far. By the way, it has always bothered me when people recommend therapy for everyone, as if therapy was a one-size-fits-all product that delivered guaranteed results. Therapy can be great, but it can also honestly be a waste of time. So much depends on the therapist. And guess what? They're all different. In my search for professional help, I had encountered a wide range of personalities and approaches, but none of them had given me lasting help. I remained hopeful, however, that there was someone out there, somewhere, who could make a difference. At the time, in 2015, one of my sons was a psychology student at the University of Toronto, and one of his favorite professors was, you guessed who, Jordan Peterson. At this point, he was more than a year away from the gender pronoun controversy that would make him famous, or I guess you could say infamous. So my son invited me to a lecture during which Peterson mentioned in passing his ongoing clinical psychology practice. I thought he might be perfect for me. His interests in art, literature, religion, philosophy mapped almost perfectly to my own. I found his number and it was relatively easy to make an appointment. It turned out he just used his professor's office to see his clients on Wednesday evenings. It was located on the 4th floor of the Sidney Smith Building, a concrete tower near the heart of the U of T campus. When I walked in the first time, I saw that he had done his best to humanize the space by stuffing it with art and mementos of his travels, even replacing the standard acoustic ceiling tiles with antique stamped tin panels. I spent the first session recounting my family and personal history and spelling out the precise details of the predicament that had brought me to him. He asked a lot of questions, and at the end of the session, he assigned me some homework. Guessing that my problem might be one of personal identity, he suggested I watch a film called Paris is Burning. He felt I could learn something about authenticity watching a movie depicting underground drag culture in the 1980s in New York. Many of the subjects of the movie were transgender, which was interesting in retrospect, considering that he was later demonized as an enemy of non-binary identities. He was basically telling me that I could learn something from the example of transgender people. So Jordan Peterson, who knew? I saw him more or less weekly that summer and found him to be very impressive in person. Unlike other therapists I had seen, he didn't appear to have a model he was trying to force my experience into. Even looking back with all that I know now, I can't say I saw any kind of ideological bias. In fact, he struck me as a pragmatist first and foremost. He offered practical suggestions ranging from holding on to something solid when I felt a panic attack coming on, to experimenting with a later bedtime to enhance my sleep. He was a good listener. His level of focus was exceptional. In spite of the fact that he had a schedule filled with teaching, research, and various business ventures, not to mention seeing other clients besides me. At the end of our 11th session, however, I informed him that our next appointment would be our last. While I was still enjoying the conversations, I had that unmistakable feeling I'd had before that the relationship had run its course. I had definitely learned some important things from him, but decisively, anxiety was no less a part of my life than it had been when I made that first appointment. I felt like more sessions probably wouldn't change that. Now, I can imagine you saying at this point, but I thought you said Jordan Peterson cured your anxiety problem. Well, yes, I did say that. And yes, he did do that. But you have to stick with me here. The story isn't over yet. Okay, so I went back to my familiar strategy of kind of muddling through, trying to avoid stressful situations without completely retreating from life. But if you've struggled with anxiety before, you know that the truth is there's no real escape when the problem is inside of you. Even if you hide away in a sensory deprivation chamber, your anxiety problem comes in there with you. Anyway, a year after I stopped seeing him, Jordan Peterson was famous. As his public profile grew, I paid more attention than I otherwise might have because of the personal connection. One day in July of 2018, I watched a video interview he did with Joe Rogan in which they discussed Peterson's adoption of a radical diet. I eat beef and salt and water. That's it, he said. And I never cheat, ever. You know the way he talks. He went on to share a long list of benefits he had realized, from losing 50 pounds to eliminating chronic complaints like gastric reflux disorder and psoriasis. But the outcome that caught my attention was the resolution of a long-standing anxiety problem. He said, within a week of starting the diet, I was 25% less anxious in the morning. Within 2 weeks, 75%. And I've been better every single day since. Better now probably than I've ever been in my life. I have to say it was mildly shocking to realize that at the time he was treating me for anxiety, he had personally been struggling with the very same issue. In a sense, he had been holding out the possibility that he could solve a problem for me that he couldn't solve for himself. And you know what? There's nothing really wrong with that. When you think about it, it's like the barber with a bad haircut. Just because he can't help himself doesn't mean he can't help others. I actually believe that. Anyway, at the end of the video, I decided I would try the carnivore diet. Peterson's testimonial struck me as genuine, completely disconnected from his usual concerns. He clearly had nothing to gain from recommending such an extreme diet. I told myself that it would be a one-day experiment and that I could decide the next morning if I wanted to continue. I should explain that I had been addicted to sugar for as long as I could remember. My wonderful mom used to pack me a sandwich and 5 desserts every day for my school lunch. As an adult, I would eat chocolate bars and donuts multiple times a day. In the evening, I'd often eat brown sugar by the tablespoon straight from the bag if the pantry was short of cakes or cookies. Total addict behavior. I was like a high-functioning alcoholic who had managed to keep his problem hidden with a gym membership and a high metabolism. And like any addict, anytime I tried to cut back on the substance of my choice, even just a little, my resolve would completely collapse within 24 hours and I'd be back where I started. That's what got my attention on the very first day of the meat-only experiment. Usually around 9 p.m. at night, I would feel a strong craving for something sweet. Yet after eating 2 steaks and a pork chop that day, I felt completely satisfied. The fact that I wasn't desperately scouring the kitchen cupboards for a leftover dessert really got my attention. I resolved to try that diet again for another day. The next afternoon, I had 2 meetings many blocks apart and decided to enjoy the walk from one to the other. On the way, I passed a Starbucks and felt none of the magnetic pull I normally would. While I wasn't a coffee drinker, I loved their baked goods a lot. In the past, I would have been powerless to walk by without going in for one of their sour cream donuts. Yet, once again, the ease with which I was able to resist was uncanny. It appeared that an unexpected side effect of the 24 hours on the carnivore diet was the total suppression of my lust for sugar. I actually began to get excited. Not only was the diet working, but it felt easy. My craving for sweets had evaporated. The carnivore diet might not have been the best diet possible, but it was the best diet I could possibly follow. Almost right away, I noticed that I was losing weight. In the first week alone, I lost 5 pounds, and I maintained that steady downward trajectory until I had gone from 191 to 163 pounds. Although reshaping my body was not my primary objective, I'm a bit of a numbers person, and those immediate results made it easy to keep going. The impact on my anxiety problem, however, was not as obvious, at least not right away. Anxiety is not easily measured. You don't get a score every day. In the past, I might have occasionally gone a week or two without a panic attack, so a stretch of relative mental peace did not necessarily signal a dramatic change. Around 2 months into my experiment, however, I had to have an MRI on my lower back. If you've had one, you'll know the procedure generally involves being inserted headfirst into a narrow cylinder and remaining motionless for 30 very noisy minutes. It's the kind of thing that would have easily triggered a claustrophobic reaction in me in the past. Yet, I approached the appointment calmly, and once inside the machine, I passed the time easily, breathing deeply and reciting lists in my head. When I emerged, I knew something had changed. I continued to have experiences like that over and over and over in the weeks and months that followed. At last, I was seeing the world without the haze of anxiety clouding my vision. In the past, I had looked incredulously at normal people experiencing life as it presented itself, rather than as a montage of grim foreshadowings. Suddenly, I was one of those people. If you're like me, you've had experiences like that in the past, where you've improved after trying a new medication or seeing a physical therapist, and you've wondered if the improvement was truly the result of the intervention. Did that cream really clear up the rash, or was it going away anyway on its own? Often it feels like time itself is the healer, and the medication or the exercises or whatever don't contribute very much at all. This, however, was not one of those situations. This was like, holy God, I'm 100% better. The consistent mood change astonished me. Eventually, I began to make adjustments to the carnivore diet. I didn't think it was ultimately sustainable. In fact, I'll probably do an in-depth video on the carnivore diet sometime in the future because it was a really interesting journey. Anyway, I started by adding nutritional supplements and then later cheese, nuts, fruits, and vegetables. Although I occasionally eat sweets now, my diet is mainly ketogenic, I would say. Maybe you'd call it a whole food diet. Regardless, on my worst day, 8 years later, I don't eat a quarter of the sugar I used to consume on an everyday basis. I continue to live free of the anxiety that used to be my near constant companion. It's obvious to me that the change of diet was the cause of the improvement, even if the exact mechanism remains a mystery. While the drastic reduction in sugar consumption probably explains it, it could very well have been the result of eliminating milk or some obscure chemical preservative that was poisonous to my system. I don't really know. I truly feel lucky to have known Jordan Peterson as a clinical psychologist before he became famous. I have fond memories of our conversations. Having searched for answers to a serious mental health problem for a long time, he was easily the best therapist I ever dealt with. Extremely intelligent, patient, and engaged. How strange then that it was Jordan Peterson, the polarizing media personality on the Joe Rogan show, who cured my anxiety disorder, when Jordan Peterson, the clinical psychologist I was paying $225 an hour, could not. So what is the takeaway? I'm not saying you should immediately go on the carnivore diet. It's a weird diet and definitely extreme. And I'm not a health professional. I was an English and philosophy major in school, so you should not take health advice from me. What I do think I can suggest with a great deal of confidence is this. If you're struggling with a mental health issue, just consider the possibility that diet might be part of the solution. For me, as far as I can tell, and trust me, I say this with caution, diet completely solved my anxiety disorder. It's been over 7 years now, and that change was that dramatic. But that doesn't mean that you're the same as me or that your condition is the same as mine. We're all so different. I am 100% certain, though, that no one has ever regretted cleaning up their diet. You can consider it to be a zero downside experiment with a potentially limitless upside. You'll see that very often. If I can help you as much as Jordan Peterson unwittingly helped me, that would make me very happy. Oh, and you can also help me by liking and subscribing if you found this video at all valuable. See you next time.